product of tangible value, which is why clients would pay for it. But that then gave us data that allowed us to compete with firms that were 1,000 times larger than us. But we had the data and they didn't. They went in and sold methodology. They went in and sold their client network and their global network. We went in and sold based upon real data, context rich, about the specific company we were trying to develop a proposition to help. And as a consequence of that, our win-loss ratio was north of 80%. When we were in competitive bidding situations. And we were competing with then the Arthur Andersons of the world, latterly the Accentures, the PricewaterhouseCoopers. In some situations, we would even be talking to the folks like McKinsey and Booz Allen and Bain would be swimming downstream to try and capture that piece of the work. And that really helped us get started. We were giving something of tangible value to a client that they would pay for. And then we could be selective. We had 2,000 clients in our benchmark. We probably did consulting for maybe 100 of those companies. We were able to essentially cherry pick those companies that had the most interesting opportunities, were going to pay, and who we wanted to work with. And we came up with a concept very early days of the Hackett Group, and we called it legitimization. We were a 3-person outfit. We rapidly grew to about 20 people in 2 years, but we were a small fry. A small little consulting firm based in Hudson, Ohio, which most people couldn't find on a map. And there we were going toe-to-toe in New York City to win business, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, in London, in Australia. We were doing business all over the world within 2 years of the firm's founding. We needed to legitimize ourselves. Well, we couldn't do that by saying we've got 10,000 consultants and we do $2 billion in revenue. Our numbers were near, our total revenue was the expenses for one Accenture engagement. Right. So we did it through our client nameplates. And we consciously went after companies that would resonate. Our clients became our sales force. And by the time we sold the business 5 years later, 96 of the Fortune 100 were our clients. And you take that blue chip client list and represent it to a prospect, and it's a very, very compelling argument. Particularly if you then follow it up with the phone numbers and contact information for 4 or 5 CFOs on that client list who will then all sing our praises. So that was A, smart, and B, lucky. The process of legitimization is something I would counsel any entrepreneur to think about. Why are you relevant to your customers? What is it that makes your clients like you and want to continue to do business with you? Maybe it's convenience, maybe it's price, maybe it's quality, maybe it's intellect, maybe it's you're the hippest, coolest, trendiest bunch of people around, but there has to be something that gives you that connection. What we did is we made ourselves the authority. CFOs would talk to each other and say, have you done Hackett? And that became a brand in the CFO community, which we were then able to extend in later years to human resources, information technology, supply chain, and a number of other business functions that really allowed Hackett to establish itself as sort of like the J.D. Power of corporate functional performance, would be one good analogy that I would bring to bear. So that's really in a nutshell how we got this thing started.
Well, you've thrown out a lot of great nuggets, and before we jump into those, can you give the viewer some sense of the revenue when you sold to AnswerThink, just to get a sense of, I know it's a service business, it's not quite the same as a product business, but the revenue growth in that 5-6 year period that you talked about?
Yeah, it's interesting how we basically were able to double the revenues pretty much every year in that 5-year period from obviously a relatively low base. And by the time we sold to AnswerThink, the revenues were probably in the $20 to $25 million range. Right. Now, that's not particularly significant, but what I will tell you is our net margins were north of 60%. Net. So, for every dollar we were taking in, 60 cents dropped to the bonus pool. And that is a revenue profit model that very few, even consulting firms or investment banks, can deliver those types of numbers. We were able to generate a very significant pool of revenue with a very small group of people. That 20 to 25 million people, 20 to 25 million in revenue was being generated by not much more than 30 people. Well, if you think about that as a revenue per professional, it's close to $750,000. And in 1997, that was roughly double what McKinsey were delivering at that time. And we were not so much focused on revenue growth. We were focused on profitability. And that paid off in two ways. One, we could attract and retain really good people because we could pay them very well. A significant portion of those profits were distributed every year to the workforce, to the employee population. But the other key component that really came into impact that was perhaps more important is we became incredibly valuable when it came time to try and sell our business because we had a lot of cash on our balance sheet. We were sitting there at the time, and it was an interesting story as to why the AnswerThink transaction came to fruition. At the particular time, AnswerThink was a roll-up. It was a venture capital-backed roll-up funded by a VC firm out of Chicago called Goldatoma. And the principle at the time, just like there were roll-ups in many other industries, was to buy a portfolio of consulting firms with the rationale, or if you like, the financial logic that the whole would be greater than the sum of the parts by combining these different consulting firms together. At the time, they made 2 or 3 acquisitions from AnswerThink's founding. I think we were the 3rd or the 4th firm that they bought. None of the other firms that they bought had any cash. And at that time, and remember this was pre-dot-com days, and the path to IPO actually had this weird concept called profitability built into it. You know, at that particular time, you still needed to show at least a couple of quarters of positive cash flow and profitability before an investment bank would take you to market through an IPO process. Now, 18 months later, that all changed. And so the simple acquisition of the Hackett Group with all the cash that we were carrying on our balance sheet basically made us that much more attractive to AnswerThink because it shortened by probably 12 months the path to the IPO, which was the cash out option for obviously the investors. And so by being able to generate a cash-rich business, it actually made us that much more valuable. Generally speaking, consulting and professional services firms, when they are sold, are lucky if they get 1 to 1.2 times annual revenue as a multiple. We were able to sell for more than 2 times annual revenue. And one of the reasons for that was not only our profitability, but also the fact that in preparation for the sale, we had hoarded quite a lot of cash. We actually took AnswerThink from being cash flow negative to cash flow positive overnight. Wow. And that in turn started the clock ticking down towards IPO time.
That's a great...